Sydney's skyline glittered under a soft sunset as the new tech company's launch event began in a high-rise overlooking Darling Harbour. The room was alive with elite investors, socialites, and media personalities, all dressed impeccably. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, marble floors gleamed, and the scent of designer perfume mingled with the aroma of canapes and champagne. At the center of the room, Andrew Matthews, a self-made entrepreneur in his early 40s, moved with the confidence of a man who had convinced the city that he controlled not only his company, but the loyalty and admiration of everyone around him. Beside him, Emma Cole, his wife of 6 years, wore a tailored silk gown that shimmered subtly in the lights. To the guests, she appeared as the elegant partner of a rising star. What none knew was that Emma had spent years hiding her true identity, carefully observing Andrew's arrogance and charm, while accumulating secrets that would one day give her the power to redefine everything he thought he controlled. She was no ordinary socialite. Emma was the sole heir of a multinational mining fortune, a billionaire in her own right, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to reveal her truth. Andrew moved through the room, shaking hands, exchanging smiles, and subtly flaunting an affair he thought nobody could prove. Vanessa Lee, a young executive from his company, lingered nearby, laughing at his jokes and leaning into his fabricated stories of charm and success. Andrew believed himself untouchable, convinced that wealth and social influence could shield him from exposure. He had no idea that Emma had been collecting every whisper, every photograph, every signed document, and every proof of betrayal for this very night. The first signs of tension were subtle. Emma's eyes glinted as she observed Andrew, noting the casual glance he threw Vanessa's way, the faint brush of a hand that betrayed intimacy he thought hidden. Guests continued to mingle, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the glittering surface. Emma's mind raced with calm precision. She would not act rashly. Every move had been planned meticulously. This night would not just expose Andrew, it would strip him of every illusion of control he had ever held. Andrew, unaware of the impending exposure, took the stage to deliver the keynote. Investors leaned forward, eager to hear his vision for the company, the innovations he claimed were the future of technology in Australia. Emma, sitting in the front row, smiled faintly, her expression serene, almost unreadable. In her purse lay the documents that would shatter Andrew's carefully constructed world. Bank transfers proving his infidelities, contracts he had signed secretly with his mistress, and legal documents demonstrating that she, Emma, was not just wealthy, but a billionaire with the power to override his authority completely. As Andrew spoke, his words smooth and confident, Emma rose slowly from her seat. The room fell silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim as all eyes turned to her. She approached the podium with calm, deliberate steps, her presence commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I believe you deserve the full truth about the man you've been applauding tonight." The murmurs grew. Andrew's smile faltered. He glanced at Vanessa, whose own face betrayed confusion and fear. Emma paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation hang in the air like charged electricity. Then she dropped the bombshell. Andrew Matthews is not the man you think he is. Behind this charming smile and polished speeches lies a web of lies, betrayal, and infidelity. And while he has been pretending to lead this company, I've been quietly leading my own fortune, and tonight I am revealing that I am the sole heir to a billion-dollar empire. I am not dependent on him, I am not powerless, and every deception he has committed is now exposed. The room erupted into shock. Investors whispered, cameras flashed, and Andrew's face turned pale. Vanessa's eyes widened, realizing that the carefully hidden affair, the lies, and the manipulations were all now public. Emma's words were precise, calculated, and devastating. She had dismantled Andrew's reputation in front of every person who had ever admired or trusted him, revealing not only his deceit, but also her own immense power. Andrew Matthews stumbled back from the podium, the words his wife had spoken echoing in his mind. Gasps filled the room as cameras flashed, capturing every stunned reaction of investors, journalists, and socialites. Vanessa Lee, who had once leaned into his charm with a confident smile, now looked terrified, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Andrew's carefully constructed image of control and success was collapsing before his eyes, and for the first time he felt raw, unfiltered panic. He opened his mouth to speak, to attempt some semblance of denial, but the room had shifted. Every eye was on him, and every whisper carried judgment. "Emma, that's not—" he began, his voice faltering. The words sounded hollow, even to him. He had relied on charm, on manipulation, on the belief that no one would ever question his perfection. Now, all of that was gone. Emma, serene and composed, held the room's attention effortlessly. She produced a folder from her designer clutch, laying it gently on the podium. "I have here bank statements, contracts, and messages that prove Andrew's long history of deception," she said, her voice steady, cold, and precise. "Every action he has taken to mislead, betray, and manipulate me and others has been documented. Tonight, you are witnessing the truth." Vanessa's face paled. She realized that everything she had believed about Andrew, the charm, the romance, the carefully curated story, was a lie. She had been an unwitting participant, manipulated to give him an image of power and dominance, and now she could no longer shield him from exposure. Even she felt the weight of accountability, knowing that Emma's revelations would dismantle the entire facade Andrew had maintained for years. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Emma began laying out the evidence. Contracts signed behind closed doors, bank transfers diverting money for illicit affairs, incriminating messages, all presented in a calm, methodical sequence. Each revelation struck like a lightning bolt. Andrew's face reddened with fury, fear, and humiliation. He tried to interject, to explain, but Emma's gaze, sharp and unwavering, cut him down before he could form a coherent defense. Journalists lifted cameras and phones, capturing every word, every document, every stunned reaction. The media's instant coverage ensured that Andrew's duplicity would be broadcast across Sydney and soon the entire country. Investors whispered nervously among themselves, questioning how the man they had trusted to lead their money had hidden such deceit. The elegance and charm that had once been Andrew's armor were gone, replaced by a raw, exposed vulnerability he had never anticipated. Emma's final reveal was the masterstroke. She looked directly at Andrew and said, "I am not the powerless woman you assumed I was. I am the heir to a billion-dollar empire, independent of your influence. While you have been trying to control me, I have quietly amassed power, wealth, and strategy. Tonight you see that your control ends here." The room fell into a stunned silence, punctuated only by whispers and the soft clicking of cameras. Andrew's panic became almost visible, a man stripped of all defenses, his influence evaporating in real time. Vanessa, recognizing that there was no longer any protection for him, quietly backed away. Andrew realized in the harsh glare of public exposure that he had lost not just his wife's trust, but his social, financial, and personal control in one devastating moment. Emma's confidence radiated throughout the room. She had orchestrated every detail, every timing, every word. This was not a spontaneous confrontation. It was the culmination of years of planning, observation, and strategy. The man who had underestimated her was now powerless in front of every witness, every investor, and every member of Sydney's elite. Andrew Matthews' face was pale under the glare of chandeliers, sweat beading on his temple as murmurs echoed through the launch hall. He tried to regain composure, raising his hand as if to speak, but Emma's calm authority cut through the chaos like steel. Every investor, journalist, and socialite was now focused on her. Andrew felt the weight of their scrutiny crushing him. The illusion of influence he had relied upon for years was collapsing instantly. He attempted to pivot, to use charm and persuasion. "Everyone, please, this is misunderstanding," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. The investors, once eager to invest in his vision, now exchanged wary glances. The media began capturing his every flinch, every hesitant gesture, amplifying the perception of instability. Even Vanessa Lee, once a co-conspirator in his web of manipulation, averted her gaze, understanding that Andrew's control over her and the narrative had dissolved entirely. Emma, in contrast, radiated authority. She held the documents that detailed Andrew's deceit, bank statements showing diverted funds, contracts revealing secret payments to Vanessa, and messages proving years of lies. Each piece of evidence was presented calmly, deliberately, giving the audience time to absorb the full weight of Andrew's betrayal. The clarity of her presentation made every detail undeniable. No charm, no manipulation, no wealth could erase the truth now. The investors murmured urgently among themselves. Questions were whispered. How could a man who appeared so successful hide such deception? How could his personal failings possibly reflect on his business leadership? Andrew felt a rising panic. Every attempted smile or reassuring gesture was met with disbelief and growing suspicion. His authority was evaporating, replaced by doubt and alarm. Emma continued, her voice unwavering. "Andrew Matthews has led a life built on deception. His charm, his reputation, and his influence were tools to manipulate those around him, including me. But tonight, the truth is revealed, and the man who sought to control and betray is now accountable before all of you." Andrew's desperation escalated. He tried to explain, to justify his actions, but Emma anticipated every word. She remained poised, giving space for him to speak, and then dismantling each excuse with precise references to evidence. Vanessa and Annalima, seated quietly at the front, corroborated the account of his manipulation and infidelity. Each testimony, each document, each undeniable fact compounded the magnitude of Andrew's exposure. Journalists snapped photos, recorded video, and whispered into microphones, documenting the spectacle of Andrew's unraveling. Social media, already abuzz with murmurs from the event, began to amplify the story. By the time Andrew realized the reach of his exposure, it was too late. His personal and professional credibility was collapsing simultaneously. Investors began questioning ongoing deals, fearing association with a man now publicly exposed for deceit and betrayal. Emma paused, letting the silence of the room intensify the impact. Then, with deliberate calm, she revealed her final revelation. "I am not merely Andrew Matthews' wife. I am the sole heir of a multi-billion-dollar fortune. The power and influence you assumed he held are no longer relevant. Tonight you are witnessing the truth, and it is a truth that ensures I and my daughter will never be vulnerable to his deceit again." The room erupted in stunned murmurs and whispers. Cameras captured every reaction, every flicker of disbelief on faces that had once revered Andrew. Vanessa's fear transformed into awe as she realized that Emma had not only revealed the truth, but had simultaneously assumed absolute control of the narrative. Andrew's world, once built on charm, wealth, and social influence, had crumbled completely in front of witnesses, the media, and the elite of Sydney. The morning after the launch, Sydney's financial district buzzed with tension. Andrew Matthews sat in his office, staring blankly at spreadsheets that once represented power and wealth. Every account he controlled, every investment he had touted as secure, was now under scrutiny. Auditors hired by Charles Harrison's team had begun an exhaustive review, tracing financial discrepancies and secret transfers that revealed the depth of Andrew's deceit. He had believed money was a shield, but now it felt like chains tightening around his wrists. Investors called, their voices cautious, disbelief undercutting their usual enthusiasm. "Andrew, we need to discuss these revelations, the contracts, the messages. This changes everything," one executive said, hesitation heavy in his tone. Each conversation chipped away at the influence Andrew had cultivated over years. Deals once assumed as secure were suspended. Partnerships evaporated overnight. The man who had seemed untouchable was now vulnerable in the most fundamental way. The very foundation of his empire was shaking. Meanwhile, Emma Harrison at the Gold Coast estate observed the unfolding chaos with deliberate calm. Scarlett, her daughter, played on the sunlit terrace as Emma coordinated with legal and financial teams. Every move Andrew made was anticipated, every weakness exploited strategically. She had not acted impulsively. This was a calculated dismantling of deceit, executed with precision. Emma's calm presence contrasted sharply with Andrew's panic, signaling not just the exposure of truth, but the full reversal of power. The media amplified the fallout. News outlets ran headlines detailing Andrew's infidelity, the evidence presented by Emma, and her billionaire status. Social media erupted with commentary, sharing clips from the launch event and analyses of the contracts and messages exposed. Andrew, once lauded as a visionary entrepreneur, was now a cautionary tale. The man who had believed charisma and wealth could shield him from consequences now faced public scrutiny on a scale he had never anticipated. Vanessa Moore, previously complicit and manipulated by Andrew, became a central figure in the public narrative. Her testimony, verified and supported by legal documentation, exposed Andrew's deceit and corroborated Emma's claims. Each confirmation left Andrew with fewer defenses, fewer allies, and an increasingly desperate attempt to salvage both his reputation and his career. Emma, observing the strategic unraveling, felt a sense of purpose beyond personal vindication. This was not revenge, it was justice, methodically executed. Every investor who withdrew, every contract that was suspended, every headline exposing Andrew's duplicity, reinforced the reality that deception and manipulation have consequences. She had transformed from the woman who once trusted blindly into a strategist, protector, and arbiter of accountability. Andrew attempted damage control, reaching out to contacts, trying to reframe the narrative and even sending private messages to journalists. But each effort was anticipated and neutralized by Charles Harrison's meticulous planning. Every move he made now strengthened the evidence against him, further eroding confidence among his peers and the public. His power had evaporated, replaced by exposure, fear, and mounting social humiliation. By the evening, Andrew's empire had begun to crumble. His financial stability was in question, his professional credibility was shattered, and his social standing lay in ruins. Emma's calculated revelation of both his infidelity and her own billionaire status had completely reversed the balance of power. The man who had once sought to dominate, manipulate, and control was now powerless, exposed in front of the city's elite, media, and the people he had deceived. Emma stood on the terrace of the Gold Coast estate, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Scarlett in her arms. The waves glinted gold and crimson, reflecting not just the beauty of the moment, but the permanence of justice. Andrew's downfall was underway, orchestrated with precision, strategic foresight, and moral authority. The narrative of deception had ended. The story of empowerment and resilience was only beginning. Andrew Matthews spent the morning pacing his North Sydney penthouse, phone in hand, trying desperately to regain a sense of control that was slipping through his fingers. Every call to investors was met with cautious skepticism. Every message to former allies returned silence or refusal. Even the colleagues who had once flattered him now hesitated, their trust shattered by the public revelations of infidelity, manipulation, and Emma's billionaire status. The empire he had built on charisma, charm, and carefully concealed deceit was collapsing in real time. Emma Harrison, meanwhile, moved with calm precision from the Gold Coast estate. Scarlett played safely in the sun-drenched garden as Emma coordinated with her legal, financial, and media teams. Every aspect of Andrew's exposure had been anticipated. She ensured that the narrative of truth would dominate, that every document, every testimony, and every record of deceit would be presented in the most impactful, irrefutable way. Emma's rise from a woman hidden in her husband's shadow to a powerful, independent billionaire was now complete. Andrew's desperation intensified when news outlets began circulating detailed breakdowns of his actions. Each article highlighted his infidelity, the falsified communications with Vanessa Moore, and the contracts manipulated to conceal his indiscretions. Investors, alarmed by the scandal, paused negotiations, questioned ongoing deals, and demanded full audits. His financial credibility, once assumed secure, was now under scrutiny, leaving him vulnerable and increasingly panicked. Vanessa Moore, initially terrified by the potential fallout, had become a critical witness in the public narrative. She provided interviews and corroborated Emma's claims, confirming the years of manipulation and deceit. Her participation added credibility and gravity, ensuring that Andrew's attempts at deflection would fail. Every exposure of his lies weakened his defenses and deepened his isolation. In the boardrooms he had once dominated, Andrew encountered cold indifference. Partners whispered, clients requested meetings without him, and his professional reputation was undermined by every documented act of betrayal. The man who had thrived on influence and charm now faced the reality that those tools were powerless against documented truth, public scrutiny, and strategic execution of justice. Emma, observing the chaos, felt no joy in Andrew's suffering. Her satisfaction was measured, deliberate, and strategic. Each action taken to dismantle his control ensured the safety of her daughter and her own future. Scarlett's laughter, pure and unaffected, was a daily reminder of why the meticulous planning, patience, and resilience had been necessary. Emma had reclaimed not only her life, but also her power, ensuring that Andrew could never again wield influence over her or her child. Andrew attempted a last-ditch effort at damage control. He reached out to high-profile contacts, tried to charm journalists, and even attempted to discredit Vanessa's testimony. But Charles Harrison and Emma's team anticipated every move. Each attempt Andrew made to regain control only strengthened the case against him, highlighted his desperation, and amplified public perception of his failures. His influence, once taken for granted, was now a liability. By the evening, Andrew's world had shifted irreversibly. Financial accounts were under audit, deals were suspended, and social standing was destroyed. Investors had lost confidence, colleagues distanced themselves, media coverage was relentless. Every plan, every deception he had relied upon for control had collapsed. Emma, fully aware of the complete reversal of power, looked out across the terrace of the Gold Coast estate, feeling the calm certainty of victory. The night sky over the Pacific shimmered with gold and violet hues, reflecting the permanence of Andrew's downfall. For the first time, he understood that his charm, wealth, and influence were no match for truth, strategy, and moral authority. The man who had once controlled others now faced complete isolation. Emma, by contrast, had ascended, powerful, independent, and resolute. The stage was now set for the final act, where Andrew would face the full consequences of his actions, and Emma would solidify her triumphant new life. The next morning, Sydney's social elite were buzzing. Andrew Matthews, once celebrated as a rising star in technology and finance, had become the subject of whispers, speculation, and pointed stares. Invitations he had previously received to exclusive events were quietly rescinded. Colleagues avoided his office, and investors hesitated before every decision. The media coverage of Emma Harrison's revelation at the launch had spread like wildfire, capturing every moment, every document, and every undeniable piece of evidence. Andrew's carefully cultivated image of perfection and control had crumbled overnight. Emma at the Gold Coast estate remained calm and deliberate. Scarlett played in the garden, laughter filling the air, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling in Andrew's world. Emma's strategy had always been precise, public exposure combined with meticulous legal and financial preparation. Tonight, Andrew's social influence, reputation, and credibility would be shattered completely. Emma's ascent was not only personal but public. She was now recognized not just as Andrew's wife, but as a billionaire heiress capable of commanding respect, fear, and admiration simultaneously. The first blow came when several high-profile investors publicly withdrew support, citing concerns over Andrew's credibility and the evidence presented at the launch. Boards that had once welcomed him with enthusiasm began reviewing contracts and agreements, questioning past decisions, and scrutinizing every transaction. Andrew's attempts to reassure partners were met with polite but firm refusals, each one reinforcing his growing social isolation. Even Vanessa Moore, once a symbol of his charm and the object of his deceit, became a key figure in the unfolding humiliation. Her corroboration of Emma's claims had been broadcasted across media outlets, ensuring that Andrew's personal betrayals were not merely private scandals but public lessons in accountability. Each interview, each statement she gave, tightened the net around Andrew, exposing him in real time to investors, journalists, and social circles that had once idolized him. Andrew's desperation escalated. He tried to leverage his social connections, sending private messages to influential figures, attempting to spin the narrative, and even threatening legal action. But every step backfired. Emma had anticipated every contingency. Charles Harrison's legal and investigative team had already ensured that Andrew's moves would only exacerbate his exposure. Each misstep, each attempt to regain influence, reinforced the public's perception of his instability and deceit. By midday, Andrew found himself isolated in every domain. Social invitations were rescinded, investors demanded accountability, and colleagues refused collaboration. His once celebrated charm, intelligence, and business acumen could no longer protect him. Emma, observing from her estate, felt a measured satisfaction, not out of malice but as recognition that justice, deliberate and precise, was unfolding exactly as intended. Even the media played a strategic role. Every statement, every image, every detail of Andrew's deception was reported, verified, and amplified. Social media debates erupted over the ethics of leadership, trust in personal relationships, and the accountability of public figures. Andrew became a cautionary tale, a man whose arrogance and deceit had finally met consequences on a scale he could not control. As evening fell over Sydney Harbour, Andrew sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the glittering lights that once symbolized opportunity and influence. Now, those same lights reflected a city that no longer revered him but scrutinized him. His isolation was complete. Emma, at the Gold Coast estate, held Scarlett and watched the Pacific waves glitter under the setting sun, a symbol of the calm, strength, and permanence of her triumph. Andrew's public, social, and professional collapse was not complete revenge. It was inevitable justice executed with precision, and the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Andrew Matthews woke to the sound of phone notifications, each one a reminder of his rapidly collapsing empire. Investor withdrawals, audit requests, and media inquiries filled his inbox. Each message carried the weight of lost trust and dwindling influence. Contracts he had taken for granted were now suspended or terminated, and every board member he had once relied upon questioned his integrity. The financial empire he had built on charm, deception, and calculated risk was crumbling before him. Emma Harrison at the Gold Coast estate continued to execute her plan with precision. Scarlett played nearby, a symbol of hope and resilience, as Emma coordinated with lawyers, accountants, and public relations specialists. Every move Andrew attempted was anticipated, every weakness exploited. Emma had transformed from a woman underestimated by her husband into a powerful strategist, capable of dismantling his influence without raising her voice. Her calm authority contrasted sharply with Andrew's panic, highlighting the reversal of power. Vanessa Moore's testimony had become pivotal in both legal and professional contexts. Investors and partners, previously unaware of the full scope of Andrew's misconduct, now had undeniable proof of his duplicity. Contracts that had once been considered secure were renegotiated or cancelled. Corporate partnerships dissolved, and Andrew's professional credibility evaporated. Even colleagues who had once flattered him began documenting his misdeeds, ensuring that nothing could be concealed. Andrew attempted to regain control through frantic damage control. He scheduled emergency meetings, attempted to charm skeptical stakeholders, and tried to manipulate Vanessa once again. But each move backfired. Charles Harrison's team had anticipated every strategy, neutralizing Andrew's attempts, while simultaneously strengthening the evidence and narrative against him. Each failed maneuver further exposed Andrew's desperation and incompetence, amplifying his social and professional downfall. Emma's public revelation of her billionaire status had compounded the impact. Investors now realized that Andrew's perceived control was largely illusory. His access to resources, influence, and authority was dependent on Emma's wealth and connections. With her revelation, Andrew was stripped of both social credibility and financial leverage. The same investors who had once been eager to associate with him now questioned every past decision, fearing association with a man who had deceived and betrayed. The media continued to play a decisive role. News outlets published comprehensive analyses of Andrew's misconduct, focusing not only on personal betrayals, but on the implications for the company's stability and governance. Social media erupted with discussions, debates, and public condemnation, further isolating Andrew. The man who had once been celebrated as a visionary entrepreneur now found himself a cautionary tale, publicly humiliated and professionally exposed. Even within his company, Andrew's authority collapsed. Employees who had once deferred to his charisma now avoided eye contact, whispered in private meetings, and documented irregularities. Leadership roles he once controlled slipped from his grasp as boards reassessed contracts and internal oversight. Andrew's professional reputation, carefully cultivated over years, had been destroyed by a combination of public exposure, legal scrutiny, and Emma's strategic execution. At the Gold Coast estate, Emma reflected on the extent of Andrew's downfall. Scarlett, now stronger and vibrant, symbolized the life Emma had protected and the future she had reclaimed. The estate itself, luxurious, secure, and filled with sunlight, was not just a home but a fortress, representing both safety and strategic control. Emma's transformation from a passive, manipulated spouse to a powerful, independent billionaire was complete. Andrew's financial, social, and professional collapse was proof that strategy, intelligence, and moral authority could overpower arrogance and deceit. By the end of the week, Andrew Matthews was effectively powerless. His financial control was restricted, investors had withdrawn support, professional alliances dissolved, and his public image lay in ruins. Emma Harrison's authority, both public and private, was unassailable. The man who had once attempted to dominate and manipulate now faced the full consequences of his actions, powerless to stop the inevitable justice unfolding. Andrew Matthews woke in his North Sydney penthouse to an oppressive silence. The city outside glittered as usual, but it felt distant, mocking. The empire he had relied on, built on charm, deception, and carefully orchestrated control, was slipping through his fingers. Investors were gone, media scrutiny was relentless, and colleagues who had once fawned over him now avoided his gaze. Even Vanessa Moore had distanced herself completely, leaving him to confront the consequences of his actions alone. Emma Harrison at the Gold Coast estate moved through her days with calculated calm. Scarlett played nearby, her laughter a constant reminder of what Andrew had tried and failed to destroy. Emma coordinated with lawyers and financial advisors, ensuring every aspect of Andrew's power was dismantled: corporate control, financial influence, and social authority. Every action taken against him had been anticipated, every weakness exploited, and every misstep by Andrew strengthened Emma's position. Andrew's psychological state deteriorated rapidly. Each phone call he made to former allies was ignored or politely rejected. Every attempt to reach investors ended in frustration. Financial accounts were frozen or monitored, contracts were renegotiated, and the public narrative was firmly controlled by Emma's strategic team. He had always believed that influence, wealth, and charisma could protect him, but now those same tools seemed useless. The media continued to amplify his exposure. Detailed reports of Emma's revelations at the company launch, Vanessa's corroboration, and financial audits were widely circulated. Social media erupted with commentary and public judgment. Andrew, once the center of admiration, was now a figure of cautionary ridicule. The man who had once manipulated every interaction was now exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly desperate. Vanessa Moore, observing from the sidelines, recognized the magnitude of the exposure. She cooperated fully with Emma's team, providing detailed testimony about Andrew's manipulations and deceit. Her credibility added weight to the public and legal narrative, further isolating Andrew. He realized that every ally he had relied upon was now gone, every opportunity to reclaim authority slipping irreversibly away. Emma, meanwhile, continued to consolidate her power. She reviewed investment portfolios, coordinated public messaging, and ensured the security of the Gold Coast estate. Every decision reinforced her autonomy and safeguarded Scarlett's future. The trauma of previous months had been transformed into strategic clarity. Emma was no longer a passive observer. She was the orchestrator of justice and empowerment, a woman who had reclaimed her life completely. Andrew's panic became visible. He paced his penthouse, trying to control what little remained under his influence, but each attempt failed. Social invitations were rescinded, professional alliances dissolved, and his reputation lay in ruins. He was forced to confront painfully and publicly that charm and wealth could not undo the consequences of deception, betrayal, and cruelty. By the end of the week, Andrew Matthews was isolated, publicly humiliated, financially constrained, and emotionally broken. Every attempt to manipulate, deceive, or intimidate had been neutralized by Emma's foresight and strategic precision. The man who had once believed himself untouchable now faced the full measure of accountability. Meanwhile, at the Gold Coast estate, Emma and Scarlett thrived, safe, empowered, and ready to embrace a future defined by strength, clarity, and resilience. Andrew Matthews's life had become a series of crises, each compounding the last. Every account he had once controlled was scrutinized and restricted. Investors had pulled out entirely, and boardrooms that had previously bowed to his charm now regarded him with suspicion, disbelief, and quiet contempt. Even former colleagues who had once flattered him now kept their distance, documenting inconsistencies and withholding support. The empire he had built on charm, manipulation, and perceived dominance was collapsing, and Andrew's attempts to salvage it only exposed him further. Emma Harrison at the Gold Coast estate oversaw every detail of the unraveling. Scarlett played under the golden sun, the sound of her laughter a stark contrast to the chaos consuming Andrew's world. Emma coordinated with lawyers, financial auditors, and media advisors to ensure the consequences of Andrew's actions were irreversible. Every move she had anticipated, every piece of evidence meticulously prepared, now worked in perfect harmony to dismantle the man who had tried to control and deceive her. Vanessa Moore's testimony continued to reinforce the narrative. Public statements and verified accounts confirmed Andrew's pattern of infidelity and manipulation, leaving no room for denials or excuses. Each revelation destabilized Andrew further, and the combination of legal, social, and media pressure made it impossible for him to regain any influence. His professional reputation had evaporated, and his financial stability was teetering on the edge of collapse. The media's role amplified the drama. Major news outlets ran detailed stories exposing Andrew's deceit, financial irregularities, and personal betrayals. Social media erupted with public outrage and discussion, magnifying the perception of his failure. He had once been a celebrated entrepreneur, a figure of admiration and aspiration, but now he was a cautionary tale, publicly shamed and socially ostracized. Even within his own company, Andrew's influence was nullified. Colleagues refused to cooperate, contracts were suspended or renegotiated, and financial decisions were carefully monitored by auditors aligned with Emma and Charles Harrison's strategic plan. Every domain he had relied on for power, social, professional, financial, was stripped away. Emma's control was complete. She had not only protected herself and Scarlett, but had also ensured that Andrew could never reclaim authority or influence. The Gold Coast estate became both a sanctuary and a symbol of empowerment. Each day, Emma reinforced the security, autonomy, and dignity that Andrew had attempted to undermine. Her rise from a hidden heiress to a dominant strategic force was now evident to everyone who had once doubted her. Andrew's attempts at damage control were futile. Calls went unanswered, meetings were cancelled, and attempts to manipulate narratives or charm contacts backfired spectacularly. The public exposure of his infidelity, combined with Emma's billionaire status and strategic execution, left him powerless and humiliated. For the first time in his life, he realized that money, charm, and influence were insufficient to protect him from the consequences of deceit and betrayal. By the end of the week, Andrew Matthews had experienced total social, financial, and professional ruin. He was publicly humiliated, isolated, and powerless. Emma, however, stood unchallenged. Her authority, wealth, and influence were absolute, and her daughter Scarlett was safe and thriving. The narrative of control had shifted entirely, and Andrew's world, once built on manipulation and arrogance, was reduced to irrelevance. Emma looked out across the sparkling Pacific waters, Scarlett in her arms, knowing that every calculated step had succeeded. The Gold Coast estate, bathed in sunlight, symbolized safety, strategy, and empowerment. Andrew's downfall was complete, his reign of manipulation over, and Emma had emerged victorious, fully empowered, and ready to embrace a future defined by strength, clarity, and independence. The Gold Coast estate was bathed in morning sunlight, waves glinting in the Pacific below, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. Emma Harrison stepped onto the terrace, Scarlett nestled in her arms, her gaze steady and confident. The months of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation were behind her. Every carefully planned move, every document, every testimony, and every strategic exposure had culminated in one undeniable truth. Andrew Matthews' reign of deception was over. Andrew Matthews, once a symbol of charm, influence, and professional dominance, was now a figure of total ruin. Social circles that had once celebrated him now rejected him. Investors had withdrawn support. Media coverage, meticulously coordinated to ensure truth and accountability, left him publicly exposed and professionally destroyed. His wealth, influence, and reputation, all tools he had wielded so effectively, were stripped away, leaving him powerless, isolated, and humiliated. Emma had achieved what she had set out to do: reclaim her life, protect her daughter, and deliver justice with precision. Scarlett, safe and thriving, represented the future Emma had fought for: resilient, secure, and full of potential. The Gold Coast estate symbolized more than wealth. It was a fortress of protection, strategy, and empowerment. Emma had transformed from a wife deceived and underestimated into a commanding, independent billionaire heiress whose intelligence and foresight ensured the safety and prosperity of her family. Vanessa Moore, whose testimony had been crucial in exposing Andrew, stood quietly beside Emma during a brief meeting. There was no animosity, only acknowledgement of the truth. Vanessa had been manipulated and deceived, but now she bore witness to justice, seeing firsthand how strategy, courage, and precision dismantled years of deceit. She left with respect for Emma's resolve and understanding of the strength required to reclaim a life threatened by manipulation. Andrew, isolated in his North Sydney penthouse, finally grasped the full scale of his downfall. Every lie, every act of betrayal, every manipulation had been countered with evidence, strategy, and public exposure. He understood for the first time that wealth and charm could not shield him from accountability. The man who had once dominated social and professional spheres now faced the reality of total vulnerability. Every attempt to regain control only reinforced the permanence of his collapse. Emma and Charles Harrison, sitting on the terrace of the estate as Scarlett played nearby, shared a quiet understanding. Justice had been executed, not through vengeance, but through strategy, intelligence, and moral authority. Andrew's personal, social, and financial collapse was complete, leaving him powerless, while Emma and her daughter thrived in safety, clarity, and empowerment. Evenings became rituals of reflection. Emma would hold Scarlett, watching the Pacific waves glint under the fading sun. Each wave seemed to carry away the remnants of fear, leaving only calm and certainty. The trauma of the past months had been transformed into a foundation of strength. Emma had reclaimed not only her life but her power and autonomy, ensuring that no one could ever threaten them again. The moral of the story was unambiguous. Deceit and cruelty, no matter how carefully executed, encounter consequences. Power without integrity is temporary, influence without accountability is fragile, and manipulation cannot withstand strategy, foresight, and truth. Emma Harrison, once underestimated, had emerged fully victorious, empowered, and secure. Scarlett, thriving under her mother's protection, symbolized resilience, hope, and the enduring strength of love fortified by strategy and courage. As the final sunset painted the estate in hues of gold and crimson, Emma whispered to Scarlett, "We survived, we thrived, and we will always protect each other." Charles Harrison stood beside them, calm and resolute, knowing that every careful plan, every calculated step, had ensured the triumph of justice. Andrew Matthews had been unmasked, exposed, and held accountable. Emma and Scarlett's new life, defined by empowerment, safety, and dignity, was now a reality, and the future shone with promise, freedom, and unassailable strength.